Okay.
Do you want me to stay on mute until it's my time?
Yeah. Yeah, that's fine. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Whichever you prefer.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, thank you.
It's 8 o'clock. Shall we just wait for about 30 seconds, 50 seconds, and then we can get started?
Good luck. I hope it goes well.
Thank you, Nina. Speak
Thank you for
soon.
joining us today. And we are going to start very quickly in about 20-30 seconds. Shall we start, Janet?
Yep.
Zina? Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
Evening.
Okay, great. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to a Note Mandarin Wine Club webinars, which are co-hosted by Cambridge China Center, the Confucius Institute for Business London, and Wine Peak, fortnightly on Sundays with our wine speaker, Jenny Wang, author of the Chinese Wine Renaissance. I'm Jinzhao Li, director of Cambridge China Center. Today is the 20th December, only a few days to Christmas and the New Year. You can see I'm sitting in front of a Christmas tree, although it's a very small tree. And I just borrowed my daughter's Christmas jumper, trying to add on some festival atmosphere. 2020 has been extremely turbulent and challenging, really, for many of us. We hope that Note Mandarin Wine Club webinars have brought some joyful moments to our old friends and our new friends. And that's all hope that 2021 will see us steadily returning to some kind of normality. And the webinar today is on sparkling wines. It's a holiday special, a very interesting theme. And at the moment, our audience are muted, but we will activate everybody's audio and video at the second part of the webinar so that we can carry on drinking and chatting. And today we have some special guests. I'll pass on to Janet to introduce our special guest. Janet.
Thank you, Jinzhao. Good evening, everybody, and welcome to the last session of the year for our webinar series. And today I'm really, really delighted to introduce a surprise special guest for everybody, Zina, but from Tickeridge Winery, which is our English wine in our 3 wine lineup today. So I am absolutely delighted to welcome her to our webinar today. And I'm sure it will be a treat for everybody to listen to her fascinating story about Tickeridge and about English sparkling wine. So that's to come later. Cheers. So we'll hear from Zina shortly. So today we will start in our usual format. I'll just quickly share some slides with everyone. To start with a brief introduction about sparkling wine and the reason why we love it so much, why it's festive. So sparkling wines, 起泡酒, right? So just a reminder of our format, we've curated a lineup of 3 sparkling wines, champagne from France, of course, and English sparkling wine, which is, of course, getting a lot of international recognition and excitement at the moment. And, of course, a Chinese sparkling wine as well. So this is our lineup. And whichever you are drinking tonight, or even 3 all at once, that's fine. I hope you enjoy them, and hopefully we can have a chat later to discuss their styles and see which one you like. So sparkling wine, of course, the most famous one is probably champagne, 香槟, right? 香槟, and sometimes in Chinese, 香槟 we would talk about, we would call 起泡酒, sparkling wine in general, we would call them 香槟. But actually, 香槟 or champagne refers to very specifically the sparkling wine produced in Champagne, the region in France. Right. And similarly, recent years, we've witnessed the rise of Prosecco becoming a very popular category. But again, Prosecco refers to a very specific kind of sparkling wine produced in a particular region in north of Italy. So all these are dedicated to certain regions, right? And of course, sparkling wine, you know, with the popularity of Prosecco, people have started to venture beyond Champagne as a category to other sparkling wine regions, such as Cava, which is a sparkling wine made in Spain. Cremant, which refers to sparkling wine made in France, but outside of Champagne region. And you might heard of Germany or Austria. They also produce sparkling wines, and they are called sect, right? And of course, we've got English sparkling wine, which is now becoming a very exciting new contender in the sparkling wine category. So 香槟 is by no means the only one worth trying, right? Okay, so today the three sparkling wines we've lined up are all made in the traditional method, which is sometimes referred to as the champagne method. But actually there are different ways, various different ways of making sparkling wine. Traditional method is perhaps the most prestigious way of making champagne, sparkling wine. But there are also tank method, transfer method, ancestral method, and carbonation, which is just injecting carbon dioxide to create bubbles. So I will briefly talk to you a little bit about where the bubbles come from, right? So bubbles are essentially captured carbon dioxide in the bottle. So carbon dioxide is a byproduct of winemaking process. So when you're making a still wine, the carbon dioxide is released into the atmosphere. It just escapes. But in sparkling wine, what we want is to capture some of that carbon dioxide in the bottle. And there are different ways of doing that, keeping the carbon dioxide in the bottle. So traditional method is perhaps the most famous and most well-known and prestigious way. So the traditional method involves, first of all, making a base wine. In French, it's called a cuvée. A base wine is essentially just a still wine, very much like how you would make a normal white wine or rosé if it's rosé champagne. And to the base wine, well, sometimes the grapes are harvested a little bit earlier to make sparkling wine cuvée to retain some freshness and acidity. And then to the base wine, you add some yeast and sugar to encourage a second fermentation. So that process is the tirage. And then the second fermentation in the traditional method would happen inside individual bottles, right? So the cuvée is bottled and yeast and sugar is added. And then the second fermentation happens individually in the bottle. And then that process would capture the carbon dioxide. And then the wine is left to age on the dead yeast, basically. So the yeast in the bottle eventually would be spent, and then the wine would still be aging on the lees. That tend to give the wine more complexity. Sometimes this pastry brioche note would come from this lees aging process. And there are certain rules. For example, in Champagne, it must be aged on the lees for at least 15 months, right? And then afterwards, once this process is through, the bottle is kept upside down. So the lees is sort of falls to the bottom, well, the tip of the bottle when you keep it upside down. So this is to essentially clarify the wine. So all the lees, all the sediments fall to the bottleneck. And then the bottle is immersed in very cold, icy water. And then the bottle is quickly opened. So the lees, the sediment is expelled under pressure. So that's the disgorging. So the dead lees, the block of sediments will be quickly expelled from the bottle. And at which point, the final step, which is called dosage, is when potentially the winemaker will add a little bit more of a liqueur, a sweet sugar liqueur back into the bottle to add a bit more sweetness. So that's the last step, dosage, before the sparkling wine is then bottled and wired. So that is the traditional method. And sometimes, as you can see, it's quite a long process. And sometimes a lot of these are done by hand, which is why champagne or traditionally made sparkling wine can be quite labor intensive and expensive. Whereas Prosecco is made in this a second method called the tank method. So in the tank method, the main difference is that the second fermentation happens in a pressurized tank instead of individual bottles. So as you can imagine, this process is a bit quicker. It takes less time, and also the style, because you don't have this long aging process on lees. The style is fresher and lighter, more fruity, more primary style of aromas. So it's a simpler style, refreshing type of wine. And also that also explains why Prosecco is also quite attractive in terms of pricing, right? Because it's made in this quicker and easier method. But of course, you can have some extremely delicious Prosecco, just because it's simple doesn't necessarily mean that it cannot be also extremely delicious and delightful. So tank method is the other very popular method, especially used now in industrialized large quantity production of sparkling wine. So those are the two main methods I'll talk about today. And then again, in sparkling wine, we have this concept of non-vintage versus vintage. So sometimes you see on the label, it will say NV, which stands for non-vintage, 非年份. Right, so most of the sparkling houses would produce non-vintage as a standard product, which means they are able to blend across the wines. The cuvee could be a blend of various vintages, and this way would allow the house to have a house style, right? So sometimes when you go for a particular champagne or sparkling wine, you say, I like this particular brand. It is because you like the house style. And in order to achieve that house style year after year, the house needs to have this ability to blend across various vintages. So that's usually the most common sparkling wine is non-vintage. But some houses would create a vintage sparkling wine to showcase the particular character of that year, right? So for example, in our lineup today, we actually have two vintage sparkling wines. So Tickeridge, the English sparkling wine, is a vintage sparkling wine, and the Chinese one is also a vintage sparkling wine. So later on, maybe we can have a little chat about that as well. And then the sweetness level in sparkling wine is also a little bit different to how we normally talk about still wine, right? So the most common level of sweetness is brut. which has less than 12 grams per liter of dosage added sugar, or extra brut, which is less than 6 grams per liter usually. And brut nature is 0 dosage or less than 3 grams of per liter. That's becoming quite popular. That's basically at the end, you just don't add any sugar. But of course, we also have slightly sweeter styles, you know, extra sec or demi-sec to de, which is fairly sweet. So dosage sweetness, this is just an interesting table to show you the relative sweetness of other drinks. So don't worry too much if you're having a lot of champagne over the festive period and think, oh my God, am I taking too much sugar? But you're not really. On this chart, you can see, you know, brut champagne, brut nature, or even demi-sec sparkling wine. They still have much less sugar than things like gin and tonic or a Starbucks latte. So I think you know, drinking sparkling wine is still a good choice during the festive period. So, okay, so now I want to just share a few tips about when you're serving sparkling wine, right? So the ideal serving temperature of sparkling wine, we say usually between 7 to 12 degrees. So a tip is if you have a simpler style of sparkling wine, you could serve it a little bit colder, right? But if you have a aged sparkling wine or slightly more complex aromatic sparkling wine and you want to show the character a little bit more, then don't be afraid to serve the wine at a slightly higher temperature, you know, around 10 to 12 degrees. That's absolutely fine, because with very, very cold temperature, it kind of inhibits the aromatic and profile of the wine. So this is a general tip when you're serving white wine or sparkling wine. If it's simple, maybe serve it a bit colder. If it's complex or aged, more aromatic, for example, you would serve it slightly warmer. And an ice bucket with water is much better than just having ice cubes because you have more surface area of the cold liquid and ice combination. So that's a better way to keep your drinks cold. And if you add a handful of salt in your ice bucket water, that also reduces the freezing temperature of water, and therefore it keeps your solution, your cooling solution, cooler for longer. And of course, you know, be very careful when you're popping the cork. You know, I've seen some horror videos on Instagram where people are pulling corks out with their teeth, etc. The best way to open a bottle of sparkling wine is just to gently twist the cork and twist it out gently, rather than, you know, pulling it out with force. And certainly don't aim it at someone's face, you know. And another interesting concept, some people have said, oh, you know, my champagne glasses, they don't produce bubble. You know, my glass, I wash them in the dishwasher and I polish them, but somehow I don't get bubbles. And that is actually because your glass is too clean, because the formation of bubbles in the glass, it needs some kind of unevenness on the glass surface. So some champagne glasses would actually have a dent at the bottom in order for the bubble to form and start. So it's called nucleation, if you want to be rather geeky about it, nucleation. So you need a point of nucleation to start the bubble. So actually, if your glasses are too polished and too clean, sometimes you will reduce the ability to form bubbles in the glass. So yeah, so either you know, clean your glass and wipe it, but maybe wipe it with a cloth that will leave a little bit of lint on it, or scratch the bottom of the glass with a metal tip, something sharp to start a point, an uneven surface for the bubbles to form. Okay, so we're gonna move on to our first wine, which is the Champagne from France. So Champagne, as I was saying, is a region. It's a region in France. Here you can see on the map, northeast of France. And this particular house, Bremencourt, is a very interesting house. So a lot of the times we tend to think that Champagne, you need to be a famous brand, in Champagne, or you have to be generations established for generations to be acknowledged as a serious Champagne house. Yet Bremencourt is a relatively new house. The brand name has been in existence for a long time, but it's been dormant. It's a brand that was laying dormant since the 50s. And in recent years, it was bought by a very flamboyant and charismatic character called Alexandre Corneau. He is a local guy. He's from Champagne, but then he went on to have a Navy career and then became an art dealer in New York before coming back to his native Champagne region. And through chance, by bailing out some friends' failing business, he acquired the brand Bremencourt and also the current winery location they have was a struggling printing company that used to print Champagne labels, but it was a building designed by Gustave Eiffel, who obviously built the Eiffel Tower. So Bremencourt's winery is built by Gustave Eiffel. So Bremencourt, the concept of Bremencourt is really to bring some liveliness to this fairly stuffy, established name of the Champagne region, the Grand Marque, where Champagne houses tend to instill this notion of grandeur. What Alexander wants to do with Bremencourt is to bring some fun and liveliness into this Champagne house, into this brand. So if you taste his wines, you'll notice that it's fresher in style. It's very elegant. It's more about elegance than power, right? So he sources. So he's a négociant brand, which means that the grapes are bought from various farmers, as opposed to fixed to a location or to a vineyard. So the Chardonnay are mainly sourced from the famous Côte de Blanc, which is one of the most prestigious areas for Champagne Chardonnay. And this wine we're tasting today, called the Brut Régence, is essentially the signature wine of the house that showcases the aromatics, the floral and fruitiness of Chardonnay, which is sourced from the southern side of the Côte de Blanc, which ripens a little bit more with more sunshine. So you can tell the wine is a bit fruitier in style. So I'm gonna move on now to Zina, who will tell us about Tickeridge, which is an estate in East Sussex, 东塞萨科斯郡. It's a bit of a mouthful in Chinese, right? So so the one we've picked today is Tickeridge, the classic cuvée, Brut. And it's the 2013 vintage. So I'll hand over now to Zina to speak to us about her wine.
Firstly, thank you very much for inviting me along today, Janet. It's an absolute privilege to be here, and I hope everybody is enjoying the range of wines that are on offer tonight. You should all be trying at least one, if not two, if not three sparkling wines, and getting into the Christmas spirit. We are one of probably the smallest sparkling wine houses in the UK, as we only have a couple of basically have 3 fields under vines that we set up from scratch back in 2007. So when we were in our 20s, we were not, other than drinking wine for pleasure, we had no connection to the viticulture world. We lived in London, in North London, and I worked in television at the time, and Anthony had a business, and the thought that we would ever live rurally was furthest from our minds. But we had kind of an epiphany as we reached our early 30s, where we decided we had 2 young children, and we were kind of thinking about our future and what we'd like to do, and really our interest in wine, and trying to maybe take that further from just being an interest to a passion, to maybe it being a career. So Anthony went back and he studied viticulture. We've got Plumpton College, which is quite world renowned these days, where you can go and you can study. And so he went there and he studied, and he came back even more excited about the very burgeoning, it was quite at an embryonic stage at that stage, back in 2006. English sparkling wine was not in the place where it is now. And so we set about trying to find our kind of small part of paradise, which we did in East Sussex. And so we've just got a couple of hectares. It's about 5 acres under vine, which is probably just on the margin of being kind of viable. And it's a beauty, as you can see from the picture, we've got fantastic vista, and the terroir is amazing. It has that sandy ridge running through it. In theory, you should always go for south-facing slopes. But with our budget, we were looking around trying to find something for a year that would kind of suit. And we found a house. We wanted to live on site so that we could fully immerse ourselves in the experience of being vineyard owners, and it being a complete lifestyle choice, but also something where we could go out morning, noon and night and check the grapes and make sure that everything was the best that it could be. And it was a struggle to find somewhere, but we did, and it ended up being north facing. So we're completely going against the grain with our slopes, that they are not the south facing that everyone expects that vineyards are. But you can see it has the most fantastic sunsets, so we quite enjoy, after a hard day in the vines, being able to sit, look out over the vineyard, and watch the sunset and think, maybe with a glass of wine, cheers. So it's a very different experience to our former lives. Every tickerage that we produce is vintage. We don't believe in having a house style. We very much believe that each harvest should speak for itself, and the grapes that are grown over that season, the terroir and the weather, which, as you know, in England is very incremental, should really be encapsulated in the bottle at harvest time. So the classic cuvee that you're tasting today, the 2013, is a very different beast to the 2014. And I know, Janet, you were talking about the fact there's a real movement towards a zero dosage. And actually in 2014, the weather and the climates that we had, I would like to say it was balmy, but we had some good weather, and therefore the grapes, in terms of their acidity, were absolutely perfect. So when it came to getting, obviously, the wines ready, we didn't need to add any added sugar. So we actually did create, into the following year, a Brut Nature. So I think the fun of Tickerage is the fact that it's all vintage and it's all unique, and every year has its own characteristics, and it makes it consistently interesting, and it means that we're constantly evolving and improving, and so it kind of keeps the passion there, I think, for us. And we, again, unlike Brimcourt, we only use estate grown grapes. So we have our 3 fields that we nurture and we care for throughout the growing season, and we do not use anybody else's grapes in our wine. So as a result of that, it can be quite a stressful time. And we have, in the time that we've had Tickeridge, we've had a couple of winters and times in the run up to harvest where there's been a frost, and we have in fact had a year where we didn't have any grapes, and we weren't able to produce a vintage at all because of the fact we had a late frost. So it's kind of, yes, being a vineyard owner, there's always something new and different, and methods changing and improving all the time. And the sparkling wine industry really becoming a proper industry these days, and fighting the French at creating a sparkling wine that is distinctive and has its own characteristics. So with the one that we've got today, if I don't know if everyone would like to, if you have got Tickeridge with you, I don't know if you want to have a smell first of all, and then have a taste. What we really pride ourselves on is that you were talking, Janet, about the minimum time that wine is on the lees, and that for a vintage, it can be 36 months. Whereas with Tickeridge, we have a minimum 5 years on the lees. And the reason why we do that is we like to think that that gives our wine a real depth of flavour, so that after that first mouthful, you still have that long finish. That kind of makes it an interesting experience, shall we say.
Yeah.
But I'm very much of the belief that sparkling wine and the tasting notes that you get, and that obviously it does lend itself to very grand dishes. But I'm really a campaigner for the fact that you can enjoy a glass of fizz with an everyday dish, with a Monday meal, a Tuesday meal. It could be with a lasagna. It could even be, we've had lots of people say they really like it with some spicy foods, and it works really well. So I think the old ways that people used to drink wine, whereas if you were having a meat dish, you'd have to have a red, actually has been thrown out the window. And it's quite fun that you can drink sparkling wine in different settings now that maybe in the past. So we recently had fish and chips and we had a glass of fizz, and it worked beautifully. So yes, there is obviously the acidity and the crisp acidity that goes with English wine, given the nature of our kind of weather and the seasons that we have. But I like to think that there's also pears and stewed apples in there, and it has that kind of which offset against that, and that everybody who's tasting it this evening is enjoying it. And knowing that it's being handcrafted by us, we are a family-owned business, so it's Anthony and myself who run it. When we first set up, we didn't have a winery. So the exciting developments for us have been that 2 years ago, we managed to get funding, for EU funding, part funding, to help us build a winery. So everything is on site now. And it means that we while away many an hour in the winery tinkering. It's amazing how many lost hours you have in there. But yes, when we started out, our children were very young, and we've now got our daughter last week celebrated her 20th birthday, and my other daughter's 22. So yes, a proper family-owned run business. We get the boyfriends involved too, out in the vineyard. So I hope that everyone has enjoyed listening to me talk about Tickeridge and enjoying drinking it too. And once again, thank you for inviting me.
Thank you, Zina. Thank you. That's wonderful. Really, really interesting story. And I loved hearing about it too. And actually, it's to your credit that you you have this commitment to making vintage sparkling wine every year, because actually that's more challenging, right? Without the ability to blend across various vintages, you're really being held accountable for that particular season, aren't you? So yeah.
I suppose the other difference that we've got recently is that we've obviously tried to think very much about carbon footprint and being sort of eco-aware. And so with our thing that we're doing as our little bit is that we're now offering it without a foil, because as you know, it looks beautiful, but it's purely presentation. So we're now foilless. And we are currently, which is exciting, and we'll be relaunching hopefully in the early part of next year, as we're rebranding. We've been, it's been 10 years now, over 10 years. So we're looking to have a new brand image to kind of fit in with the changes that we've had over the course of the last decade. So watch this space, and next time you see us, we'll be having a more kind of modern vibe with the label.
Oh, brilliant. Great. Yeah, we're looking forward to that. We'll definitely be following you
Thank you.
with great interest. Good luck with that. Excellent. Great. Thank you, Zina. We'll probably have lots of questions for you later from
Don't make them too tricky.
Yes. No, it's a really real treat to have you on tonight. So great. Thank you. So, okay. So we'll quickly move on to the third one, which is the Chinese sparkling wine. So China doesn't produce a lot of sparkling wine at all. So this is really quite a special find. It was produced by Great Wall, which is COFCO owned. It's one of the largest brands wine brands in China. But this is made by their estate called Chateau Saint-God. So this is essentially a chateau wine, I suppose. You know, it's their own vineyard based in Shachen in China, Hebei, in Hebei province, which is fairly close to Beijing. The backstory of this wine is also quite interesting. It was made for the 2008 Olympics. So it was for the VIPs who showed up. So they wanted something impressive. So this was vintage 2006, and it spent 10 years on the lease, also very long time. And therefore it's also developed this complex character, brioche notes, you know, fairly structured, fairly layered mouthfeel. The interesting thing about Great Wall was that Great Wall was tasked on several occasions to produce the first of many things in China. So the first dry white wine was also produced by Great Wall in 1979. And this sparkling wine, you know, one of the very few producers who make sparkling wine. And the story was that a lot of these state banquets and state functions in the 70s, the Chinese leadership felt it was an embarrassment that they have to use French wine or sometimes American wine for their state banquet. So the Prime Minister Zhou Enlai in the 70s said, no, we must really produce our own wine to serve at our state banquet, because baijiu, the really fiery grain liquor, was deemed too unpalatable by these world leaders, you know, with sensitive palates. And they felt they had to produce Chinese made in China sort of wines to serve at banquets. So Great Wall was essentially tasked with making some of the first dry wines to be served at state banquets. And then of course they were tasked to produce this sparkling wine for the 2008 Olympics as well. So I'll be interested to hear what you think of this particular wine as well later. Okay, today the intention is, you know, being the last session of the year, you know, I'm quite keen to get the discussion going as soon as possible. So I'm just going to essentially end here. We'll quickly go through next year's program. So we'll come back again on the 24th of January. So next year, we've got 6 more programs for season 2. So season 1 was very much focusing on Chinese wine history, the regions, wine producing regions of China. In season 2, what I hope to do is to open up the field a little bit more. We'll talk about some more international subjects, things like climate change, things like comparing and contrasting Chinese and English wine industry, both being sort of this new exciting wine regions. There are of course lots of differences, but there are also some similarities, so that could be quite fun. And we'll talk about things like Chinese cuisine and wine matching for Chinese New Year. and a bit more about cultural and philosophy and arts, and a bit about wine investment, because a lot of you probably know a lot of Chinese people are quite interested in investing in wine, but some of them have also lost out on sort of fairly speculative type of activity. So we'll discuss all that sort of thing next year in the next season. So I hope that you will all come in the new year and join us for the next season. Okay, so for now, thank you all for joining us this year. And yeah, so now let's open up the floor, Jingzhao, and we can have a chat. And especially today, we've got Zena with us. So that's quite a treat for us.
Hi, Janet.
Hello.
Hi. Okay. Yeah. Okay. I'm just having the our audience to activate everybody's.
So everyone can unmute yourselves if you like, and show us. Tell us what you're drinking. Bob. Bob's got a lovely background again. I think.
That's another room in the Oxford and Cambridge Club. Needless to say, it's virtual, unfortunately. But,
that's very nice.
I'm trying the Chinese one.
Very good.
That's very interesting. There's not a lot of bubbles in it. It doesn't. There are a few very small bubbles coming out. I find it quite lively, quite acidic.
Okay.
Surprisingly, because it given its age, but the may show the age with the yeastiness and the oxidation place of it.
Yes.
Very interesting.
Great. Have you tried the other any of the other ones in the?
I've got them. I haven't opened them yet. This is the first one.
Okay. So. Is that saved for Christmas? Is it? Great.
Christmas.
Yeah. What do you think?
Aha. Kirsten, hello.
Yes, I did not sadly get hold of any of the wines, but I've been enjoying your talk.
But yeah.
And I've got red wine, so I'll be okay.
Very good.
Paul, what are you drinking?
I'm on the Bremen core.
How is that holding up?
I think it's okay. It's slightly different to what I normally drink from Champagne, Bollinger.
Okay. Actually, they're from the same area. So Bollinger and Bremen core, they're both based in IE.
Oh, I've been there. Yes, I know that place. That was where Lalique, the glass producer, was from as well, I think, when I went there. There's a statue of him.
It's opening up the red.
Yep.
Catching up.
Yeah, need to catch up.
Yeah. We are having the Chinese from Chateau Sangard.
Okay.
Yeah, with everything.
The color is quite golden, huh?
It is very golden.
Yeah.
And it's got a very prominent honey nose on the nose. Really.
Interesting.
I do agree about the bubbles or go pretty quickly, or not many there. But actually, to be honest, I think it is better than what I thought it was going to be. I think it's pretty good. It's got good age there, and it's
still got a bit of.
Yeah, it's very good. Yeah, I quite like it. I think it's not bad at all. And personally, I think this one you can actually have this with a kind of pudding.
Yeah.
Because it's very kind of rich and everything else.
Yeah.
But the other two we've not tried yet. I'm very interested in in both of them, quite frankly, but especially the English one as it's really taken off, and especially as we've been down to Sussex. The Tickeridge. We've been down to Sussex a few times, and we did Rathfinny a few weeks ago, and we've been to Ridgeview and that. Whereabouts are you exactly?
So if you went to Rathfinny, we're probably about 15-20 minutes from there. That's all.
We'll have to come down that way again. But certainly they're really taking off, and the quality is exceedingly good. And also this week, which I think is going to happen, but I chair this group of catering managers, and they look after all different sorts of areas within the UK, high prestigious clients and things. And one of the guys actually told us on Tuesday that he's changed his wine list, and his wine list now, and this is for a really big important company. I won't tell you the name of it at the moment, but it probably will come out. That all their wine list now is just going to be English sparkling wines and English still. Well, in fact, they've already got the wine list up and running, and he said the feedback has been very good. The only comment he's had, which you can understand slightly, is that
Not cheap.
the still wines are a little bit expensive on the wine list, but they're expensive to buy, quite frankly. But he said he hasn't had that discussion on the sparkling wines, but he has on the still wines. But the list is only, well, I should say British, but I presume it's English. English wines only. He's taken off all the French and all the Italian that they had. There's nothing on there.
Definitely.
That's mainly because of Brexit, quite frankly, not because of any other reason.
Yeah.
But I also think that obviously when we started out all those years ago making wine and still wines, they didn't have a great reputation, and since then I think English producers have honed their craft, and now the wines that we are producing do definitely stand up, don't they? Because there's no sommelier in the land who will put a wine on their wine list that they don't think is fit for purpose and isn't even sort of stacking up against sort of well-known brands. And it's lovely to see and be part of that industry that has grown over the last sort of 15 years or so into one that's now a viable, and as you say, is on top restaurants lists.
No, it's very...
I think I remember something like 50% now of the vineyards in England are for creating sparkling wine. I mean, it's very much moving that way. So that must be a fairly recent trend. I remember visiting Denbies near Dorking about the time you were starting your vineyard. It must have been 2006, and they grew then about 16 or 18 different grape varieties. They had to be sort of say experimental and hedge their bets as to what might do well in a particular season. Yeah. And at the time, they had about 10% of all the vines under cultivation in England. I think they were quite big, obviously still are.
Yeah.
Yes, we're definitely the other end of the spectrum. We're sort of 5 acres under vine, and with predominantly the Champagne 3 varieties. We have also had a foray into still wine as well, and we have a Chardonnay and a white Pinot Noir, which it's always good to, I think, test yourselves and to do something new and different. So that's it, and have developments underway. But yes, English wine, still wine, because your base is obviously sparkling, it is expensive to produce. We have all the tax, etc. So it's not a cheap product, but hopefully it's a delicious one.
So your market, I know you only, I think, make 6,000 bottles. Does it go to the local restaurants, or is it cellar door sales, or?
Yeah, so obviously this year's been very interesting. We were actually away on holiday for the first time in years and flew back into lockdown with 98% of our market being sort of local restaurants and things like that, and being shut. So we were like, oh, okay. But because we're small, we were able to be able to change our business model quite quickly, I suppose. And fortunately, our daughter had to return back from London as well. So she helped us kind of get into the 21st century with our social media. And we had a new website. And then we just basically started to let people know that we existed. The end user, the sparkling wine enthusiast. So it's been a really interesting journey for us this year. And every time that we're wrapping a bottle, if it's in a gift wrapping, we're doing it all by hand, and it's really exciting because we're now open to completely different type of market than we were before, where it was predominantly into restaurants, and obviously restaurants came back, and then obviously we've had a lockdown again, so it's been kind of, that aspect has been quite turbulent this year, whereas it's lovely to now engage with the end user and have that rapport and build that up. And we now send out newsletters, and people tell us where they've been drinking the wine, how they found it, and it's really nice to have that contact with the actual drinker.
Yeah.
So I was just going to say, so have you found that you're getting people who like the fact you're making a different wine each year? Because obviously for big restaurants, they want the NV concept is obviously you know what you're getting. But if somebody goes in this year and has an entirely different wine for the one they thought they were going to get, that could be a problem. Well, on the other hand, for people really interested in wine production, they'll be very interested to see how it changes from year to year. So if they buy into your explanations and things, are you finding that a good marketing ploy that gets people coming back because it's the way you do it and because you make it differently every year?
Yes, I mean, we're very open and honest about the fact, and really kind of quite pride ourselves in the fact that we do have a vintage and we let the season speaks for itself. And it is our 2013 cuvee is very different from the 2014, for example, because the 2014 is a zero dosage. And I think people like the honesty of it, that we're not, that we're saying this is what we do and this is why we do it, because we think it's important, and it's lovely to be able to produce a vintage. And yes, as a result, yeah, we get people who they try one and then they try another, and it kind of leads to lots of stories and discussions and chats. So it makes it, I suppose it adds interest in some respects.
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah, I find, Zina, I found your wine, like you were saying, it's a great wine to pair with food, right? Because I love, it has that savoriness and complexity that would go very, very well with a lot of dishes. Like you say, I mean, fish and chips, I think absolutely, why not? Because you've got the acidity to cut through the grease, and absolutely would work on a Tuesday night with everyday eating. So yeah,
sounds great. Let's do that after lockdown.
Yeah, absolutely. The great food pairing, sparkling wine, actually. And I guess the interesting thing you said about north facing, it could be with climate change, who knows, you might end up being in a position where, your grapes will be ripening with more character, slower with more elegance, rather than being blistered by so who knows. I think it's quite exciting, to follow. Similarly with Chinese wine, which is one of the things I want to talk about next year, is this English wine and Chinese wine being two new regions. Actually, there are lots of interesting personalities and stories to follow through. It's a story that's still evolving. It's not like champagne, it's pretty much set, Bollinger, they know what they're doing. But whereas with English wine, with Chinese wine regions, there's still a lot of things sort of still being experimented on. So it's quite exciting. So yeah.
Zina, could I just ask about the soil? You said, I think it's an alluvial soil, because people tend to think, oh, Champagne, it's all on chalk, and we've got the chalk over here that comes around from the Champagne region, the same sort of geological features. But again, I seem to remember that, in fact, most of the sparkling wine in England is not on chalk soils. And I'm just wondering what you found with the particular soil and what that's done for the...
Yeah, we've got actually free draining and a sandy ridge that runs through ours, which I think helps to give the terroir, if it helps to give the grapes their lovely flavour. And so there's that free draining, which obviously is a good thing.
Right. And sorry, just on the north and south facing thing, so is that just because we're in the UK, so you thought you should be south facing, or is that something they also do in Champagne, that they would have a south facing vineyard?
Yeah, it's south. Well, the recommended way would be to have south facing slopes to capture the sun.
Would that also be in France, or is that just because of
it's
being
also
in the UK? Also in France. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, it's interesting. Didn't know that.
Aha, Duncan, hello.
Hello.
Are you drinking Tickeridge by any chance?
Yes, I'm drinking Tickeridge. And I must say, Zine, congratulations. I have just consumed a glass of Tickeridge with a roast beef sandwich. I think it went
nice.
So I certainly echo what Janet's been saying, that it's a good wine to have with food. And I was surprised that with rare roast beef and mustard, it was as good as it was. So I think it's a delicious wine, very good. The other thing which I think also improves it is that I'm drinking it out of it's hardly a champagne glass. It's a Zalto universal glass. So you can really appreciate the aromas of the wine. And I think it's, it's evolved a little bit since I opened it about half an hour ago. It's a little bit oxidized, but it's got a lot of complexity. So I think it's delicious.
Oh, thank you. And that's obviously, we're hoping that the complexity is because we do give it the time to mature a lot longer than that, kind of that 36 months that's required. So.
Yes, yeah. I didn't realize it was on the lees for, you said 5 years.
Well, a minimum 5 years. This is actually 7.
Oh wow! Yeah.
I mean, this is an extraordinary amount of time. There's a lot of complexity to it, which is makes it a very nice experience, because it clearly changes as it evolves in the glass because of that.
And I've now got tomorrow's menu sorted. I'm going to try take out the rare roast beef sandwich. It sounds a great idea.
Well, it worked very well, and my mother lives in Kent, and so I have explored some of the vineyards in Kent, and I agree with you that the English wines are getting much better. I remember drinking wine from Tenterden many years ago, and it really wasn't a very pleasant experience. But Kit's Coty Chardonnay is extraordinarily good value. Sorry, extraordinarily good, but not very good value, because it's about £35 a bottle, and that I think is the problem with a lot of English wine. It can be very good, but it's almost the same price as Village Pouligny-Montrachet.
Yes, the winner is always the that man.
Yeah.
So Zina, did you mention that you disgorge it literally when it's being ordered or something? Like it's quite late, right?
We do small batch runs.
All right. Yeah.
Everything we do is kind of bespoke, personal.
Yes.
We put the labels on ourselves. We do the whole thing. We've got the winery, every aspect of the winery.
Amazing.
Wow. Yeah.
A labour of love. I think when Anthony said he was going to retrain at Plumpton, I didn't quite realise the full extent of what being a viticulturist wife was. And it's great, but it's equally nerve-wracking when you're constantly aware of the weather throughout the year. We have about 10 weather apps, and we always go with the one that says it's going to be sunny.
Dina, do you offer wine tour of your winery?
Yes, well, what we've been doing, we basically do private tours for up to 6 people. So we will close the winery and the vineyard, and then have friends or family coming round, and we pair the wines. So when you come on a tour, not only is it private, but you get to taste the entire range, including the still wines. And we pair it with award-winning local charcuterie and cheeses to make it a really memorable experience. And we kind of like to invite people and make them feel part of kind of our vineyard family, really. So when the weather's good, we sit out on the decking and look out over the vines whilst enjoying a glass or 2 of fizz. So it's it's a lovely way, and we've had great feedback from that.
Sounds very tempting.
Yeah, it sounds amazing.
On your to-do list, I hope, for next year.
Yeah.
And I'm sorry, I think I might have missed this part of it. That how big is the vineyard? What's the size?
Big? We're really teeny tiny. We've only got 5 acres under vine.
So wow.
Yes, we have 3 fields: the house field, the barn field, and the far field. That's
gosh.
Yeah, and then the winery to the side, and yes, so small but hopefully perfectly formed. You never know.
Yeah, definitely.
How many
sounds
bottles
amazing.
Very much obviously dependent on the weather, but approximately 8,000 to 10,000 annually.
Mm-hmm. And do you bottle it all in bottles, or do you have half bottles and magnums?
We actually, at the moment, it's all bottles. It's so difficult, isn't it? Because there's such a long lead time, whether to go for you never know, in the future might do magnums, but at the moment it's just the normal standard size bottle.
Yeah.
Are you after a magnum?
Well, actually, I like tasting lots of different things. So, I mean, occasionally half bottles are quite nice. But yes, you're right. A magnum looks quite festive.
It does.
We for our students, we only use magnums on our festive halls, and the students comment about that. We have to buy them a year in advance. I mean, I'm talking about still wines as well, because they love the theatre of them. The staff don't quite love them as much as students, quite frankly, because some of them are quite heavy. And like we had an Alsace one this year, and I said I'd bought it because of social distancing, because it's about 1 metre in length.
Well, Bill, I think your students are very lucky to have you looking after them. That's what I would say. I don't think my college would have, catered for us in magnums all the time. So yes, brilliant. So yeah,
the wine was good, and the other two look very good. So we're going to try that.
Yeah, I do know some of them did say they're saving Tickeridge for Christmas. So, we'll let you know. They've saved the English sparkling wine for to be opened next week with their. Yes, so yeah,
well, I could say quite
we'll hear more.
So, yes, Tickeridge will be served on Christmas Day.
Oh, well, thank you, Duncan. I really appreciate that. Merry Christmas to everybody.
Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, especially for joining us tonight.
Very happy Christmas. I know some are in tier 4, so it's a safer Christmas. But every day we just try to make something joyful to keep us going into some normality. Oh, I see some more people joining in. Yanping there.
Hi.
Oh, yeah. Jing Tao, we just like to say thank you so much sorting the wine delivery for us.
Sorry for all the
enjoying the Chinese one.
You got
it's really nice.
Happy Christmas.
So we wish everybody Merry Christmas and
Merry Christmas, everyone.
Merry Christmas and Happy New Year.
Merry Christmas.
Thank you.
And thank you very much for these talks, because during this situation, they really are like a nice bright spark every 2 weeks, and it makes a difference. And thank you very much, Janet. It's really fun.
Thank you, everybody.
Well done.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Everybody, we will see you on the 24th of January.
So details on the Cambridge China website. So we'll see you. All right.
Thank you.
Thank you so much again.
Bye.
Merry Christmas.
Good night.
Good night.
Keep that bottle. I want to look at that. I want to take photos.
Can it come? Where do I go?